This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions. Steve, welcome to Tag Radio.
Hi, Frank. Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Chinese say, may you live in interesting times, and people say it's either a curse or a blessing. I think we live in interesting times. The dynamics, the conversions, all of the connectivity, everything we talk about, all the buzz things. But I can't think of a more accelerated, explosive expansion of a marketplace and what's happened in the quote-unquote fintech arena. Let's cover a little bit about, we're going to cover a little bit on what you guys do at your organization, but at first let's talk about a perspective on what's happened in the financial payments community in general. Give us a little catch-up on the last, say, 2 or 3 years, 5 years.
Absolutely. Well, I think, first of all, I think the payments industry itself and fintech are very much synonymous, and I think as you see things like mergers and acquisitions taking place and some consolidation of some of the larger players, you see a ton of new technologies that continue to come about, and some of these larger companies are either buying them up or partnering. And I think in today's world, as things like cryptocurrency continue to play a major factor, and you have different ways of making payments, and especially online e-commerce, wallets, and the variants there, it's an exciting time. And I think as the economies continue to grow around the globe, we'll see even more multinational e-commerce take place as well, where cross borders really become just online payments in general.
Well, I guess, again, I mean, the acceleration across all the sectors has impacted the private sector, unlike I would guess, any era, certainly in modern times. And one of the kind of threads that keeps it all together, obviously, is the global ability to move currency around and to deal with some form of a common value proposition, I guess. I don't know how you describe that relationship in terms of the value against the actual purchase price of certain commodities and things. Now you got geopolitics over across the top of it. It's a fascinating thing about how you can stay ahead when everything is changing so quickly. I mean, you guys are right at the edge of it where obviously whatever the latest and greatest is going to impact a client. So on the other hand, I guess where I'm going here, how do you deal with legacy systems and established enterprise, especially in the financial vertical, and then also deal with a radical, almost exponential explosion in innovation as far as technology is concerned?
Sure. I think what we're seeing in the industry is many of the large players that are in the payment space specifically are building these, over-the-top layered gateway systems that help connect all their systems and allow their clients and us to be able to connect to one platform in order to provide those multiple services. And then, as I mentioned, I think partnering becomes a large piece of that. Many companies will buy, but they also will have a large segmentation of partnerships where they're providing multiple services. And I think the goal for every company is to try to provide a one-stop shop, if you will, of all the currency conversions, the payment platforms, the varieties of the pieces that come into play in the payments world, to provide those in one place for the merchants. And ultimately, it's for the consumer's benefit, right? So we can all spend more money and more easily and have more ways to do that. So I think that's a big piece of what we're seeing in staying on top of it all. And then there's, you'll have new technologies that will come about that I'm sure will allow things to become either easier as well as take complexity and create it down to its simplest form.
Well, we tell our clients all the time that the disruptive technology that's impacting your market today is not the end. It's just the beginning. So I'm fascinated when you start to deal in the matrix, and especially when you have this what amounts to the highway in terms of the financial transaction, as you say, facilitation and automation and then value proposition. I mean, it's so critical to the overall evolution of. I mean, we're talking supercomputers now. So I mean, when we get into data and supercomputers and all that kind of thing, the fascination I think for us on the outside looking in is what does 5 years, 10 years look like, and how does anybody own a business have any way to make a plan longer than the next 20 minutes? I'm exaggerating to make a point. Steve, in that regard, let's talk a little bit about PPRO, and let's go into what's your purpose and how does your company operate and compete in what I'm talking about, this rather dynamic environment.
That's a great question. Well, for PPRO, in its simplest form, PPRO makes it easier for companies to collect payments online from consumers that are in other countries or are making payments that are not your typical card brands that we're used to seeing, Visa, MasterCard, et cetera. There's a lot of different payment methods around the world, and we connect them. In a more technical way, what we do is we aggregate what we refer to as alternative payment methods, which are really those local payment methods that people in other countries prefer. And in most countries around the world, they use different forms of payments such as bank transfers or cash-based voucher systems or wallets.
Farm animals, right? I mean, in some of the countries they actually
could be, right? I mean, what's interesting is you have payment methods where a consumer will make a purchase online because they have internet access, but yet they don't have any way to make the payment, so they'll go to their local convenience store with either a voucher number, and they'll go and they'll make that payment, and that transaction will be complete at the convenience store by the cash they just paid. So there's everybody culturally does things differently than we necessarily do here in the U.S. or in some of the standardized countries, you could say, in card schemes. They're all different, which I think is an interesting place to be for us because their technologies are changing as well in each of those. When you think about things like wallets,
are you in international country? Are you outside the United States? I guess electronically.
Yeah,
you have clients out.
Give
us a spectrum. Give us a spectrum of some.
Sure. So PPRO, our headquarters are in London. The company's founded out of Munich, Germany, and we have offices all over Europe. The U.S. office, Atlanta office, is our first U.S. office, and we are connected to over 140 payment schemes around the world. So any geography you go into, we are connected to one of those local payment schemes and providing access to our partners, which are really the larger payment players in the world. We provide them access to all of these local payment schemes. So, yeah, we are a global company with connectivity around the world.
I remember back not too many. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'll also mention that we are getting ready to open up our office in Singapore here in a couple months as well. So we continue to expand across the globe.
Again, to the amateur looking into the thing, it's just fascinating because you mentioned culture. Because I mean, obviously that I almost think that the currency is a form of identity in terms of a nationalized ideology, if you will. So where I'm going is when they even talked about the euro and that kind of thing. I think a lot of us thought, how's that going to all work when they got to collaborate and work together as a culture? And it's a case where I think the philosophy says you keep it automated, simple, so that computers can handle it. And then fundamentally it gets down to the part where they've got us profiled and we're kind of doing the same things, only different. Because, I mean, I'm guessing that in some case, they're talking now about a radical shift to I think they call it an ownership economy. I've heard it called a freelance economy. And this is that situation where the individual becomes the asset and not a company. So in other words, you market yourself independently. So in a case of a radical disruption and a huge unemployment, and everybody's talking about, and I say unemployment, but a radical change in the marketing structure of that operation, streamlining it, what are those going to people do? What are they going to do? And of course they talk about jobs, but jobs aren't going to be jobs. They're going to be more like some form of enterprise empowered by the individual. So I'm just saying that the aspects of any of this stuff doesn't happen until a sale is made, until a transaction is made. So, I mean, at the core of it, you guys are so vital. I mean, it's almost like a main vein kind of going to the heart. How does your company, in terms of merchants, how do you get the reach? I mean, how do you help the merchants expand their reach, and then how do you I'm thinking as you're describing it, Steve, I remember BASF, we don't make a product, but what we do is we make those products better. Would you say kind of that your partners have an infrastructure because of you that's a more advanced, better solution to their clients?
Absolutely. And I'll answer it this way. I think first, as you look at the world of e-commerce, we continue to see the borders come down in terms of purchases, right? So consumers around the world can shop for products, and internet penetration continues to expand, mobile penetration continues to expand across the globe, where countries 5 years ago didn't have access to products that we sell here in the U.S., and vice versa. And so as that continues to expand, it becomes very much a global experience, e-commerce experience. In that, what we do is we allow merchants to have access to those local payment methods. And we do that by partnering with some of the larger acquirers and payment processors that can give their merchants access to these various payment methods. And I think I'll use the largest example as in China. Obviously, they use Alipay and WeChat Pay, which are both wallets, and most consumers in China use those as payment methods, where a general merchant in the U.S. might not have access to that payment method, except maybe going direct or having their processor have a direct relationship, where we give them access not only to those payment methods, but also hundreds of more around the world. So it's bringing the product and service to not only the doorstep of that consumer in some other country, but it's also allowing them to use their local payment method that they're used to using. So they're paying the way they want to pay, and they're able to get their product and service. So it's a win-win across the globe.
Well, you talk about, in a way you're describing organic versus, I guess, acquisition. Maybe acquisition is a form of organic, but I've seen so many cases, and in fact, we've had an opportunity to do some work, say, with global payments and watch them, I felt anyway, introduce a global, what would you call it, acquisition? I don't want to call it mergers, because what they do is they buy operations, to the best of my guess, not so much to get the technology, but to get the customers. So when you're talking about rapid expansion and an acquisition mentality, all of a sudden, things can get pretty explosive. I'm not saying you guys are getting involved specifically in that, but maybe go into a little bit of, if you can share it with us. You've got a good task. You're going to be the leader of the U.S. headquarters. What's the plan, Stan? What are your goals, and how do you think you're going to go about reaching them? I mean, in the market that's so explosive. I mean, I'm fascinated.
Yeah, sure. Well, maybe I could touch on first, why we chose Atlanta, if that's okay.
Sure.
Just to talk a little bit about, and since I have been in the payment space here for about 14 years, been in Atlanta, and PPRO chose Atlanta for several reasons. One is we've had tremendous growth over the course of the past 18 months, and many of our partners are right here in the Atlanta base, but specifically in the U.S. We talk about the First Datas, and you mentioned Global Payments and Elavon and
sure.
And many of the others. We partner with them and provide them access to our local payment methods around the world. So we're recognizing that we needed to support our U.S. partners. That was one of the reasons coming to the U.S. Atlanta specifically, when you think about, our company viewed Atlanta as certainly a growing technology hub. And just having been at the TAG Summit this past week, that was very evident with the hundreds and thousands of companies that are here in Atlanta Metro. And then there's things like having direct flights from Europe to Atlanta makes it easier, coming back and forth. And then we've got a lot of partners that are in the midst of launching their alternative payment methods to their merchants. So it's really important that we have a support base here with the right tools, technical expertise, and even last minute, if I've got to fly to New York to meet with a partner, tomorrow, that's pretty easy for me to fly from Atlanta to somewhere in the U.S. versus supporting it from Europe. So that's part of it. And as we thought about, when we think about what our goals are here from a U.S. perspective as we continue to grow in this global economy, is number one is we want to fully support our partners around the world, which goes back to what I just mentioned. Number two is I think about educating the U.S. of what's going on in the global e-commerce payment space. And I'll use one interesting fact here. So when we think about, there's many people in the U.S. that aren't familiar with this term called Singles Day. You may or may not be. It's actually the largest e-commerce shopping day in the world, and it's really promoted by Alibaba, which is in China. And last year, Singles Day is 11/11 on the calendar. It makes more sense there. Mm-hmm. And on that day, they did last year in excess of $25 billion on one day. And we support Alipay and WeChat Pay, so we see a lot of volumes fluctuate on that one day. In comparison, our Black Friday and Cyber Monday in the U.S. did about $6 billion. So just in contrast, when you start thinking about how large this global economy is and that there's billions of people around the world that are shopping online, it's important that we support that. And then we want to make sure that we educate people that what the global e-commerce space looks like and how other people in other countries prefer to pay and the different types of payment methods and how they work. So part of what we're doing here and one of our goals is to educate. And then as we grow our operation here, certainly we want to staff it with the right talent for the right roles. I think being here in Midtown Atlanta helps from a technology perspective. We're right around the corner from Georgia Tech, and obviously it's a payments mecca. So we're in the payments industry, so having the right talent there is important and knowing it. And then I think beyond that, as we think about our growth in the Americas, we'll look to support growth in LATAM from our PPRO Atlanta office, and then as we continue to realize a lot of revenue from all of the global growth, we want to certainly have a substantial piece of that come from the U.S. markets as we continue to support the global economies.
Well, let's segue. We're talking about Georgia, Atlanta, industry sector, global leadership. Kind of segues right into FinTech South. Obviously, over the last, I'm going to say 5 or 6 years. I mean, I'm kind of a spectator across all of the industry sectors, almost on a horizontal basis. So I got a little bit about everything rather than a deep dive on one thing. But certainly, I've watched the financial industry kind of almost morph into FinTech. In a sense, by I'm not going to say that it was only in Atlanta. Certainly, I think it was rising up in a lot of different locations. But I remember the first couple of financial society meetings that TAG held, and everybody was kind of in the room and kind of not uncomfortable, but kind of feeling their way around and trying to get an understanding. It clicked, and it almost seemed like a bolt of Eastern philosophers as a bolt of lightning across a dark sky. Because all of a sudden, fintech was the conversation, and now the next step is taking on the community, centralizing and organizing it, and then growing it in terms of outreach throughout the entire South. I think that's kind of the goal. I know you guys are heavily involved in it. Go into a little bit about FinTech South and, of course, the upcoming event that's going to be happening in early May.
Absolutely. We're excited about the event coming up. We've been a part of Money 2020 across the globe in terms of those forums, and I very much get a sense that FinTech South is going to be very similar when you have multinational companies that are coming into Atlanta, talking about the financial sector, and being able to present what they're doing around the globe from a financial services standpoint. Obviously, I mentioned the partnerships that we have that are already deep here in the U.S., but also across the globe that we'll be able to see our partners at these events. And I think, as I mentioned, in terms of an education standpoint, we're going to be able to provide further education about what's happening in the global e-commerce markets around local payment schemes and where we see the future going from a payment scheme standpoint around the globe. So we're looking forward to being represented there, both in having some sessions that we'll be hosting, as well as having the opportunity to have a booth there. So excited for FinTech South. I think it's going to be a great forum. Really will put a stamp on what's happening in the payments industry here in Atlanta, around the globe. And, what better forum than the Mercedes-Benz Stadium, which is just an exciting pinnacle for Atlanta itself.
You get a sense of pride. I was over in the Cobb area. My personal residence is further north, but God, how incredible it was to see the celebration of growth over there. I mean, the impact of that baseball field and the impact of the growth in there has been phenomenal. I guess where I'm going is that Mercedes-Benz thing is such an icon. I mean, it's really, really a unique selling proposition. So, I mean, I'm not advocating the fact that you're only going to go to that thing because you're going to see the stadium. If you haven't seen it, you're going to want to see it. But if you've seen it, you know that it's a great experience, but even more important is participating in what I think is going to be a historic event, because I think it's kind of I wouldn't say the launch, but it's certainly a launch of a new aggressive attitude on the part of the community to reach out to a greater collaboration amongst states that we encompass here. And I guess in a way, and it's not hyperbole, but we've often had the capital of the South and everything else, or in the early evolution of some of the greater economy of the South. Hey, I think we're in a very, very strong position to have several categories where I think we've got a real competitive advantage, but certainly in the area of fintech. And part of that is because of PPRO and the other players that have advanced the ball so much, that have built the technologies that have given the people the tools to grow those businesses. Steve, thank you. Well, thank you for coming to Atlanta. We really appreciate that and enjoy you guys being here, certainly. But above that, thank you for taking time out of what I know it's got to be a crazy busy schedule. You guys are involved in not only what you're doing, but planning for the event that's coming up pretty quickly. Thank you for joining us for a few minutes here on Tag Radio.
Frank, thank you very much for having us. We appreciate it. We are proud to be part of Atlanta now. We look forward to the future and certainly connecting with our partners and others that are interested in growing their global e-commerce.